In 399 BCE, a 70-year-old man stood trial in Athens, accused of impiety and of corrupting the youth. His real crime? He wouldn't stop asking questions no one could answer. He was found guilty, sentenced to death. But this video isn't really about what happened to him. It's about whether the way he thought was actually right. And to find that out, we're going to do something he'd have approved of. We're going to interrogate his own method, using his own method. Athens, 5th century BCE, a city fresh out of a brutal war, proud of its democracy, and scared of losing its certainties next. Tradition wasn't just respected here, it was armor, and Socrates spent his life taking people's armor off. He'd find someone who was certain they understood a concept: justice, courage, piety. He'd ask them to define it. They would, confidently. Then, step by step, he'd follow their own definition until it contradicted itself. This is called the elenchus, Socratic cross-examination. It always ended the same way, not with an answer, but with aporia, productive confusion. The person walks away knowing less than they thought. That's not a trick. That's the philosophy. So here's the obvious follow-up. The one Socrates himself would have asked. Why should tearing down beliefs be the right way to find truth? Isn't that just doubt, dressed up as wisdom? Let's actually test that. Elenchus style. Take the opposite position. Some things can just be known for certain, without needing to survive questioning. Ask the obvious follow-up. How do you know that? Whatever answer you give falls into one of three traps. There's actually a name for this: Agrippa's trilemma. Trap 1. You justify your belief with another belief, and that one needs justifying too, forever. That's an infinite regress. Trap 2. Your reasoning loops back and uses the belief to justify itself. That's circular. Trap 3. You just stop and declare, this one doesn't need proof. That's not an argument. That's just picking a place to stop looking. Every claim to absolute certainty eventually hits one of these three walls. Now apply that same test to Socrates' own position. Always keep questioning. Hold nothing as beyond doubt. Does that collapse the same way? It doesn't, because it never claimed certainty for itself in the first place. It's not saying, this is the truth. It's saying, this is the most honest process for approaching truth, given that we're fallible. A method that admits its own limits survives being questioned. A claim that hides from its own limits does not. That's not a coincidence. That's the method passing its own test. If Socrates had just been one clever guy in one Greek city, this would be a nice story. But across cultures that never spoke to each other, separated by oceans, separated by centuries, other thinkers kept landing on the exact same move. Generations before Socrates, in India, Buddhist philosophy was already built around dismantling fixed views. Centuries later, the philosopher Nagarjuna formalized this into a rigorous method, the tetralemma. It examines a claim from 4 angles. Is it true? Is it false? Is it both? Is it neither? Until the mind lets go of needing a fixed answer at all. Different continent, same instinct. Certainty is the obstacle, not the goal. In China, the Taoist tradition attributes to Lao Tzu the line that those who know don't say, and those who say don't know. Not knowing, again, treated as wisdom, not failure. 2,000 years later, in France, Descartes sat down and tried to doubt everything, deliberately, systematically, just to see what, if anything, could survive the doubt. That's not a Socratic student. That's the same method, reinvented from scratch. A century and a half after that, Kant did something similar, but pointed inward. Before trusting any of his conclusions, he questioned the tool doing the concluding, human reason itself. What can it actually know, and where does it quietly overreach? In the early 1900s, the philosopher Husserl built an entire method, phenomenology, around deliberately setting aside your assumptions about the world, just to see what's actually there underneath them. And modern science runs on a version of this too. A good hypothesis isn't one that's been proven true forever. It's one that survived every attempt to prove it false. That's not far from aporia, with a lab coat on. Centuries later still, within the Vedantic tradition, teachers built meditative practice around one repeated question. Who is asking this? Peeling back assumed identity, layer by layer. As far as anyone can trace, none of these people were copying each other. They were, each on their own, arriving at the same load-bearing wall underneath human understanding. You don't get to truth by protecting your beliefs. You get there by seeing which ones survive an honest attack. This is why Socrates isn't just an interesting guy from history. He's evidence of something structural about how minds work, echoed independently, over and over, by people who never read him. When something keeps getting rediscovered across unconnected cultures, that's not proof, but it's evidence, the closest thing history gives us to an independent experiment, which makes his own era's response even stranger. While the sophists sold rhetoric for winning arguments, Socrates gave away, for free, the one intellectual habit that every serious tradition after him would independently reinvent. That's not radical because it was rude. It's radical because it held up better than almost anything else from that era did. Not because it was beyond challenge, but because it never needed to claim it was. Underneath all of it was one more belief. Socrates thought no one does wrong on purpose. Wrongdoing, to him, was just misunderstanding what's actually good for you. Which means every honest cross-examination wasn't just a logic exercise, it was moral repair. When he was sentenced to death, his students begged him to flee. He refused. Not arrogance, consistency. If he'd run, he'd have proven his accusers right, that his ideas were just clever talk, dropped the moment it got real. Instead, he drank the hemlock, calmly, reportedly still discussing philosophy as it took effect. His death wasn't just a tragic irony. It was the final application of the exact method he'd spent his life defending, testing his own convictions against the highest possible stakes, and not looking away. One more question worth asking, because Socrates would have asked it too. Are we now claiming this is the one correct way to find truth? For everyone, always? Careful. That claim doesn't survive its own test. The moment you say questioning everything is the final answer, you've stopped questioning. You've built a new certainty out of the tool that was supposed to dissolve certainty. So the honest version isn't, this is the only true method. It's this. This is the most self-consistent tool anyone's found so far. The one that survives being turned on itself, without needing to lie about its own limits to do it. That's not a small claim, but it's not the only correct answer either. And that difference is the whole point. So this was never really a video about one man in Athens. It's about a pattern that keeps resurfacing everywhere humans have seriously tried to think. The beliefs worth keeping are the ones that survive being questioned. The ones that can't were never really yours to begin with. So, what belief have you never actually let fall apart?